The Pegasus, an episode filled with people being evasive and lying about everything, is conspicuously lacking the one character who can tell when people are being evasive and lying about everything.
Picard is surveying the results of Captain Picard Day, which Troy refers to as one of the children's favorite school activities, so we can make inferences about the quality of the education system aboard the Enterprise.
He gets a message from an Admiral who postpones their current mission to rendezvous with the ship Crazy Horse. And they even bring up that dumb warp speed limit from that other episode, but only to tell them that it doesn't matter.
And I liked the Admiral's reaction to Picard's explanation of Captain Picard Day.
I'm a role model.
I'm sure you are.
When they meet up with the Crazy Horse, Admiral Pressman beams over, played by Terry O'Quinn,
who I recognized from The X-Files, Tombstone, and Lost. And since we just saw What's-Her-Face in Inheritance, I started to wonder if The Next Generation was actually some sort of flash-forward event.
Riker is uncomfortable, and it is explained that Pressman was Riker's captain on the Pegasus when Riker was an ensign, and Pressman says the Pegasus is still out there.
And that the Romulans have found it. The ship was lost 12 years ago and reported as destroyed, but Pressman says a piece has been found by the Romulans, and the Pegasus was a prototype ship with experimental technology, so they have to find it first.
He says that prototype led to a lot of the technology on the Enterprise, but I would think the Romulans would presumably have captured other Starfleet vessels since then that would be much more valuable than that.
I suspected he was lying about something, because throughout the whole meeting, Riker seemed really uneasy.
They head for the area and encounter a Romulan warbird, which openly decloaks and hails them, and Picard displays his legendary diplomatic skills.
It would be an awful shame if your ship were damaged due to some misunderstanding.
They each dance around the issue for a while, without revealing why they're actually there, and keep tracking each other once communication ends.
In 10 Forward, Riker tells Pressman he's had his beard for about 4 years, but this is the 6th season that he's had it.
Riker asks if they're going to find the Pegasus and the experiment, and brings up seemingly controversial events that happened before he left. And Pressman says if the mission is successful, they can finish what they started, but the right way, much to Riker's shock.
And Pressman tells Riker he has special orders hidden in the computer about their true mission, but he can't reveal them to anyone, even Picard.
And this time, no one's going to stop us.
Later, Picard talks to Pressman about how he selected Riker as his first officer even though he had never met him, and he says it was because Riker had disobeyed a direct order in the past by preventing his captain from beaming down to a planet during a crisis. He knew he couldn't have anyone too strict about the rules because that would get in the way of his habit of violating the Prime Directive.
And Pressman says he cared more about people shutting up and doing what they're told. Picard brings up how the record of the Pegasus's destruction was super vague, and Pressman says without Riker's loyalty to do what he was told, none of them would have survived.
Riker goes to sickbay with a broken rib from a sparring match with Worf, and he's mad at himself for getting distracted at a crucial moment, saying that if it was a real battle, that would have been the end.
Both the Enterprise and the Romulan ship are still searching the area when Geordi says they found what could be a warp core signature from an asteroid.
Data says it would take at least 6 hours to find the warp core in the chasms of the asteroid, which seemed oddly specific. With the warbird approaching, Riker recommends blowing up the asteroid, but Pressman says that is a last resort only.
Picard suggests shooting a bunch of particles to mask the ship's signature, which Data says doesn't make any sense, but then Geordi says they can hit it with another kind of particles, and Data says that would work, and is not dumb.
Picard says they will leave afterward to make the Romulans think they didn't find anything and come back later, but Pressman says they might be handing the Pegasus over to them. The warbird comes by and does a sensor sweep, and everyone on the Enterprise makes definite conclusions about the Romulans' conclusions and decides they must not have picked up the signature.
Picard says they need to pretend to keep scanning, and they'll come back later, and then he goes to chow down. Pressman tells Riker he needs to talk to him, and they go into the ready room, and Pressman lays into Riker for suggesting they destroyed the Pegasus.
Riker says he doesn't enjoy keeping Picard in the dark, and Pressman says Riker has changed and stands up for himself more now, but he knows he can still count on him. Riker visits Picard with the scan analysis, and Picard shows Riker the report that the crew of the Pegasus had mutinied right before it was destroyed, and he's shocked that Riker never mentioned it.
He says the report was classified and very difficult to get, and he asks Riker what actually happened. Riker says they were running tests, there was an explosion, and everyone mutinied. And Riker, who was still fresh out of the academy, defended the captain, and he and a few others fled the ship before it blew up.
During the whole scene, Picard is questioning him in a very over-the-top TNG way, and Riker is acting exaggeratedly guilty.
He demands to know why there was no further investigation,
but Riker says he can't say any more. Picard acknowledges that Pressman outranks him, but says he may have to reconsider Riker's position on the Enterprise.
Which was bullshit, and we all knew it. I mean, Riker could be in jail, and Picard could come in and say, don't worry about it, let's go.
And Picard was being uncharacteristically aggressive, given that he doesn't actually know what happened yet, and it was clearly Starfleet hiding everything.
But then when he contacts Starfleet, they just tell him to shut up and do his job.
The Enterprise heads back to the asteroid, and Data says they can't send a shuttle in because there may be gravimetric or electromagnetic interference. And Pressman suggests taking the entire Enterprise in, which Picard objects to, but Pressman makes it a direct order.
And it's pretty dramatic, but not as dramatic as when the Falcon did it.
And the effects are actually really cool. I'm sure 1,000,000 times better than the shitty CGI we'll get in Picard. Picard tells Pressman that he's going to call off the mission if the chasm gets too narrow, even if it means insubordination. And he doesn't seem to contemplate that his crew might see him as being insubordinate and have him thrown in the brig and follow Pressman instead.
They're not going to do that.
I was hopeful.
The ship is getting roughed up, but eventually they find the Pegasus, but half the ship is inside solid rock.
Pressman says the equipment they need is in engineering,
but only Pressman and Riker will beam over once it's safe to do so.
Once they're on the Pegasus, Riker mentions the crew's stuck in the rock, but Pressman doesn't care. He goes straight for the device and says that it is still intact.
Riker says he was hoping they wouldn't find it, and that he refuses to let Pressman start his experiments again.
This room is filled with dead bodies. These people died because of this thing.
And Pressman is dismissive, and says everything that went wrong was everybody else's fault.
Riker says if he could go back, he would have turned on Pressman instead of defending him. He says Pressman was violating a treaty, but Pressman says the treaty has let the Romulans get the advantage over them. I thought it was a pretty good scene, even if we don't know all the details yet.
The ship starts rocking, so they beam out with a piece of secret equipment, and it turns out that the Romulans have sealed off the entrance to the asteroid.
I think you're supposed to assume that the gravity caused the rock to fall into the chasm, but there clearly would not be that much gravity there.
I thought there was like a lava crap in their way.
I don't know. Then they are hailed by the Romulans.
They're told that it was an accident and offer Picard the chance to beam everyone off the Enterprise and be taken back to Romulus to be tortured.
Which Picard says he will consider. Worf says they can just blast their way out with phasers, but Data says that might cause the rest of the chasm to collapse. Which again, there wouldn't be that much gravity to have to deal with that.
Then Riker says they should use the secret piece of equipment, which is a prototype cloaking device, much to Pressman's rage. Picard gives us a little history lesson, saying the Federation agreed never to develop cloaking technology,
and that treaty has maintained peace. But Pressman says it has only held them back, and he's taking command, and he orders Worf to take Picard to his quarters. But Worf refuses, and no one else listens to Pressman.
When Picard asks how the device works, Riker says it's not just a cloaking device, but also allows ships to phase through solid matter, and they could hook it up to the Enterprise. And without any more information than that, Data says, yeah, that should work. After they hook it up, Geordi says, hey, watch out, if we're not careful, things could blow up. And Riker says, that must be what happened last time.
So they turn it on and begin moving forward, and there's a big tension moment when they're about to reach the rock in front of them, but they successfully phase and make it through.
Why did it look all magic-y while they're passing through rock? Wouldn't it just look like rock?
Because this is TNG. Picard orders the cloak deactivated, to which Pressman responds that the Romulans will know about it if they see them, but Picard says he wants everyone to know.
After they decloak, Picard says they'll contact the Romulan government and arrest Pressman.
Riker says he'll have to be arrested as well, and they go off to the brig.
When they're down there, Picard tells Riker there's going to be a full investigation, and that Riker will have to answer some hard questions, but as long as he can tell the truth, he still deserves to wear the uniform and serve on the Enterprise. And even though Riker's sitting in jail, Picard says, it doesn't really matter, come on, let's go.
He'll always be number one in his heart.
The Pegasus, overall?
This was a much better episode than most of the ones this season, and another one that dealt with some surprisingly weighty ideas. It was also surprising to get a Riker episode that actually gave us some important backstory for him. I really liked the moral dilemmas here, and even though they did make Pressman a blatant bad guy toward the end, it was more realistic and handled much better than usual. He didn't turn into a cartoon like I expected, because that's what they usually do. I thought it was a little odd that Riker never talked to Troy about anything. A scene like that would have been a good way to have Riker start to figure out how he was going to handle things with the cloak and with Pressman. I would have preferred that, but it still worked without it. What I thought didn't work was Picard in particular, and also Riker at times, acting out of character in the middle stretch of the episode. Picard seemed to take things very personally that didn't affect him personally, and he was mad at Riker without even knowing what had happened yet. And all the stuff with the Enterprise being trapped in an asteroid was really dumb. They could have had the Romulans have some kind of shield around the asteroid that they couldn't get through until they phased or something, but instead they just blamed it on gravity, which didn't make any sense. But the main stuff with Riker and Pressman I thought was pretty good. I just hope the events of this episode don't get brushed off right away, but you already know what I expect about that. I gave it a B-.
I give it a B. I also like the moral dilemma in this one, but I will point out this is not the first high-ranking Starfleet officer we've seen go on a crazy campaign because they're convinced they're right. We saw it in The Wounded. How many insane captains and admirals are there in this organization? Pressman's attitude during the whole thing was pretty realistic for people who act like that in real life. Even at the end, when he was caught and said, "Yeah, I got powerful friends." I thought it was really interesting that they brought up the warp speed limit. I didn't expect that to ever come up again, but again, they just dismissed it and said it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that was disappointing.
And I thought this would be a great 2-part episode, with the second part having the ramifications of everything that happened here. It would be a good courtroom drama episode. To have Riker have to defend himself, to see how the Romulans react to everything. This could cause a lot of cool stuff to happen, but I'm also expecting this to never come up again. I mean, they violated a treaty with one of their biggest enemies, and the next episode they're probably going to be on freaking Risa or whatever. Is that where they go?
Yeah.
Or something stupid like one of Geordi's old girlfriends will come back on the Enterprise, but she'll have a boyfriend, and everything will be all awkward. Or Data will realize that he's accidentally cloned Spot. So yeah, I think this was a good episode for this season, which is nice, because we haven't had too many of those. And I look forward to seeing how it all ties into Lost.